Mr. Josiah Oldcastle was very fond of old cars. He had a small brown car, a 1934 Baby Austin 7, which he called Araminta. It lived in a garage with a green door. Mr. Oldcastle was proud of his little car, and he polished it every day. There was another garage there with a red door, but it was empty. "In there," he said to his grandson, Robert, "I had another car once. It was blue, with a black hood and a brass horn, a genuine vintage car of 1926. I had to sell it years ago. I wonder where it is now." Just then, the post arrived. There, among the letters and bills, was a catalogue for the sale by auction of veteran and vintage vehicles. And there, on the first page, was a picture. "To be auctioned. An Austin Clifton Heavy 12.4 Vintage 1926. 1,660 cc, 4-cylinder side valve engine, 4-speed gearbox, 4-wheel brakes, in blue and black livery, black canvas hood, brass radiator, lamps and horn. Complete with battery, spare petrol tin, spare wheel. All in excellent condition. Best offer secures." Mr. Oldcastle became very excited. "Look! Look," he said. "Here it is. This is surely the very car that I had all those years ago, that lived behind the red door. It must be Gumdrop." And it was. When Mr. Oldcastle went to the auction sale next day, there, sure enough, among the many fine cars and carriages for sale, was Gumdrop. Many people wanted to buy it. Mr. O'Hara wanted Gumdrop because he was a collector of vintage cars. Mr. Banger wanted Gumdrop because he was a car dealer. And Mr. Oldcastle wanted Gumdrop because he once owned it himself. "But I only hope it won't be too expensive," he said. The auction began. People called out a price, others called out a higher one, and the highest bidder secured the car. Many were sold this way until it was Gumdrop's turn. "Now, what am I bid for this remarkable vehicle?" shouted the auctioneer. People bid briskly for Gumdrop, and the price got higher, higher, and higher. At last the auctioneer cried, "Going, going, gone," and banged his hammer. "Sold to Mr. Banger." Mr. O'Hara didn't buy it after all, because Gumdrop wasn't rare enough for him. "And I couldn't buy it after all," said Mr. Oldcastle sadly to Robert when he got home, "because Gumdrop wasn't cheap enough for me." So Mr. Banger drove Gumdrop to his showrooms. He polished the car until it shone, and then he put it among all the new cars in his window. "Oh, this old-timer should help to sell my modern cars," he said. Many people stopped to admire Gumdrop, but only a few of them bought new cars. Mr. Banger was disappointed. Archibald Gridline came into the shop one day. "Now, I don't want a new car," he said, "but will you sell me that blue vintage Austin there? I want to race it at Silverstone." "Oh, I might as well," said Mr. Banger, "because after all, this car isn't smart enough for me." So Archibald Gridline drove Gumdrop to his garage. There he removed the hood so that Gumdrop could go faster, and he unscrewed the horn and put it into the toolbox. Next day he drove Gumdrop to Silverstone and entered in the all-comers vintage sports car 5-lap handicap race. The vintage cars were roaring round the circuit. Gumdrop went faster and faster, but the other cars went faster and faster still. Suddenly there was a big clatter in the engine. Gumdrop stopped. "Oh, Lord, that's the big end," cried Gridline. "I'm out of the race." He was very disappointed. Rocky Basher came to help push Gumdrop off the course. "Yeah, I'll buy that colt off you," he said. "I want to race it at the autocross, see?" "You can have it," said Gridline, "because after all, the car isn't fast enough for me." So Rocky Basher drove Gumdrop to his workshop. There he repaired the big end, removed the wings and lamps to make Gumdrop lighter, and painted the car yellow with green stripes. Next day he drove Gumdrop to Chartridge and entered in the autocross trophy race. All the other cars were modern, small and light, and they raced each other round the rough grass track. When Rocky's turn came, Gumdrop slithered and skidded and skipped round the wet grass as fast as possible, but the other cars slithered and skidded around faster still. Suddenly, Gumdrop lurched forward, spun round and stopped. "Oh, my wheels come off," cried Rocky. I'm out the race." He was very disappointed. Bodger Prescott came to help with the wheel. "Will you sell me your car?" he asked. "I want to race it at the Ivanhoe hill climb." "I will that," said Rocky Basher, "'cause after all, the car isn't light enough for me." So Bodger Prescott drove Gumdrop to his shed. There he removed the windscreen, the running boards, and the spare wheel. He then greased and oiled Gumdrop, ready for next day's big hill climbing race for veteran and vintage cars. The other cars were dashing up the hill with roaring engines and crunching gears. Gumdrop went as fast as possible, but the hill was steep and very slippery. Gumdrop's engine was roaring too, until there was a jet of steam coming out of the radiator, and Gumdrop had to stop. "I'm boiling!" cried Bodger, "and we're out of the race." He was very disappointed. Farmer Golightly came to help with a can of water. "Oh, that's a useful car you got there," he said to Bodger. "It helped me on the farm." "You can have it," said Bodger Prescott, "because after all, the car isn't strong enough for me." So Mr. Golightly drove Gumdrop to his farm. There he removed the number plates, the doors, and the back seat, so that there'd be more room for the sacks of corn and bales of straw which he wanted Gumdrop to carry for him. Even so, there wasn't enough room for such big loads. Mr. Golightly was very disappointed. "Oh, I just have to leave it in the yard," he said, "because after all, the car isn't big enough for me." So Gumdrop stayed in the farmyard. Without a hood and a horn, without lamps and wings, windscreen or running boards, with no spare wheel, number plates, back seat or doors, and painted yellow with green stripes, Gumdrop was a strange and sorry sight. One day, some weeks later, Mick Mulligan came by. "Oh, that's a funny old car," he thought, "but it might fetch a quid or two at the scrapyard." There was nobody around, so he quickly jumped into Gumdrop, started the engine, and drove out of the yard. Mick Mulligan drove badly and too fast. Gumdrop lurched from side to side and skidded round the corners. Suddenly, at the sharpest bend of all, they stopped. They had to. They'd bumped into a small brown car that was standing by the roadside. It was Araminta, Mr. Oldcastle's baby Austin 7 of 1934. Mr. Oldcastle was there himself, trying to mend a puncture, and he was very angry. "Look where you're going, you unmitigated, blundering nincompoop!" he shouted at Mick Mulligan. "You've bent my bumper and nearly had me over, too." Mick was frightened. "Oh, I'm that sorry, sir," he stammered, "but I can't pay for the damage I've done to your car. I tell you what," he added, "you can have this old heap instead." Without waiting for a reply, he jumped over the fence and ran away. After all, Gumdrop wasn't nearly valuable enough for him. Mr. Oldcastle looked at Gumdrop, but didn't recognize it. "Odd-looking machine," he said, "though it is an Austin heavy 12.4 right enough, and I could restore it. Oh, it would be grand to have another vintage Austin again." And so he hitched Gumdrop to Araminta, and they drove home, with Robert steering Gumdrop. Next day, Mr. Oldcastle and Robert drove to the scrapyard in search of the missing bits for Gumdrop. Old cars and bits and pieces were heaped up everywhere. "Well, it's funny you should ask me," said Mr. Ebenezer Hearn, the scrap merchant. "Quite a lot of Austin 12.4 parts have come in lately. Only the other day I had some doors and a seat from Farmer Golightly. There they are, yeah, they're over there with the other bits and pieces I've had. You can have the lot, sir." So Mr. Oldcastle and Robert piled all the things on top of Araminta's roof, tied them down securely, and drove home. So the restoration began. They bolted back the wings and running boards and replaced the windscreen. They screwed on the lamps and hinged up the doors. They clamped on the hood and put in the back seat, and they screwed the spare wheel in place again. Finally, they painted the body blue and the wings black. After a hard week's work, the car looked as good as new. "You know, it looks exactly like my old car now," said Mr. Oldcastle, "though I wish that this car was actually Gumdrop itself." Just then, Robert was rummaging in the toolbox, while Mr. Oldcastle polished the engine. "I wonder," he thought, "if after all—" He looked at the engine number. C4478. "The same!" he shouted. "The same number! This must actually be—" "It is! It is!" shouted Robert in turn as he pulled out the shiny brass horn. This is our own original Gumdrop after all. So Mr. Oldcastle got Gumdrop back again. They drove proudly to the town next week to take part in the vintage car display. Farmer Golightly was there, and he gave Mr. Oldcastle's Gumdrop's original number plates, which he'd taken off back at the farm. The mayor was there, and he gave Mr. Oldcastle a silver cup for the best restoration of a vintage car. And there, too, were all the people who had owned Gumdrop since the vintage auction sale. They came up to admire Gumdrop and to congratulate Mr. Oldcastle. There was Mr. O'Hara, for whom Gumdrop wasn't rare enough. There was Mr. Banger, for whom Gumdrop wasn't smart enough. There was Archibald Gridline, for whom Gumdrop wasn't fast enough. There was Rocky Basher, for whom Gumdrop wasn't light enough. There was Bodger Prescott, for whom Gumdrop wasn't strong enough. There was Farmer Golightly, for whom Gumdrop wasn't big enough. There was Mick Mulligan even, for whom Gumdrop wasn't valuable enough. And finally, there was Mr. Josiah Oldcastle, who got his old car back and would keep it forever. For him, Gumdrop was certainly more than good enough. On a fine, crisp winter's day, a strange ah-ah was heard in the high street. People stared. A man exclaimed, "God, look at that! That must be an original Austin Clifton Heavy 12.4 Vintage 1926, yeah." It was, and it was Gumdrop. As he drove Gumdrop home, Bill McCarran felt very proud of his old car, from the rubber light tail lamps at the back to the shiny brass thermometer on the front. He honked the horn cheerfully at some chickens pecking away in the snow at the side of the road. The chickens behaved rather stupidly. They scuttled straight across the road, right in front of Gumdrop's bonnet. Bill pressed the brass horn again. Ah. He sounded the klaxon horn as well. Oh. And he stamped on the brake. The chickens fled to safety, but Gumdrop lurched and skidded on the icy road, finishing up in a ditch deep in a snowdrift. Bill got out and pulled, but it's not easy to lift an Austin Clifton Heavy 12.4 out of a snowy ditch. Farmer Hearn came out to see what all the commotion was. "Oh, I'll give you a hand," he said, but Gumdrop wouldn't move. "I'll have to get some help," said Farmer Hearn. He called Charlie, the cowhand, Mr. Pudderfut, the shepherd, Alf, the odd job man, and Simon, his son. But still Gumdrop would not move. "Oh, it's no good," said Farmer Hearn. "This is a job for the farmer's friend." And it was. Farmer's friend pulled Gumdrop out of the ditch in no time. After all, he was a sturdy Fowler single-cylinder traction engine built in 1903, but still as strong as 6 horses. Bill examined Gumdrop's wings, his tires, and his chassis. There was no damage. Then he noticed that the shiny brass thermometer was missing. He searched for it all round, but he couldn't find it in the deep snow. "Well, you can't buy thermometers like that anymore," thought Bill sadly. He thanked his new friends for all their help, and then he drove Gumdrop home. On a fine, warm summer's day, some months later, Bill was driving Gumdrop, still without his shiny brass thermometer, down a country lane. Suddenly, what should he see by the side of the road but a traction engine? "It's Farmer's Friend," he cried. "I wonder where it's going." But Farmer's Friend was standing quite still. "I've run out of water," explained Father Hearn. "We were going to the Chartridge Steam Fair and Veteran Car Rally, but there's a leak in the tank." "We'll get you water," said Bill, "while you repair the tank." He drove Gumdrop back to the farm, hitched up the water tender, and was soon back. Farmer Hearn was most grateful. He filled up the tank, got up the steam pressure, put the lever into high gear, opened the regulator, and Farmer's Friend moved off. "We'll get to the rally yet," said Farmer Hearn. Bill meant to follow. He turned on the petrol, retarded the ignition, pressed the magneto switch, pulled out the choke, and stamped on the starting button. But Gumdrop wouldn't move. Then Bill checked the autovac, the carburetor, the magneto, and the plugs. Everything was in order. Then he knew what had happened. Gumdrop had run out of petrol. So Bill took the spare petrol can and set off in search for some petrol. When he'd gone a little way, a big lorry pulled up beside him. "Can't help you, mate," growled the driver, "but there's a garage a mile back." Jolly unfriendly, thought Bill, as he set off again on his long, hot walk. The lorry drove on, but the driver stopped when he saw Gumdrop down the lane. "Caw," he said to his mate, "that's a beauty. It'll fetch a packet at the car auction." and the lad that owns it, he'd go for a walk," laughed the driver's mate. Without another word to each other, they turned into the lane, got out of their cab, hitched Gumdrop to the lorry, climbed back into the cab, and drove off. When Bill returned at last with the petrol, there was no Gumdrop. "Stolen!" gasped Bill. "It must have been that lorry." And he ran back to the road for help. There he saw, coming towards him, a line of cars. The veterans were coming back from their performance in the rally. "Jump in," said the driver of the leading car, a 1904 de Dion Bouton. "We'll catch them if we can, but my car won't go very fast." They chugged along for a long time, as fast as the car could go. "There they go!" cried Bill suddenly. "There's the lorry, and there's Gumdrop. But we'll never catch them up. The lorry's too fast for us." And the lorry was too fast for the de Dion Bouton. But as it came round a narrow bend, it had to stop with its brakes squealing. For coming down the road, blocking it from side to side, was a slow, wide, tall, stately machine. It was Farmer's Friend, back from the rally, where he had won a prize. There is nothing you can do when you are in a lorry with a vintage car hitched on behind and a traction engine blocks the road ahead. Especially when you can see a 1904 de Dion Bouton coming up behind as fast as it can go, with its occupants cheering and shouting. The thieves leapt out of their cab, hopped over the fence and ran away, and they're probably running still. Gumdrop was safe. Bill filled up the petrol tank, and Gumdrop and Farmer's Friend drove back to the farm for tea. The de Dion Bouton came too. In the yard were some chickens, playing with something round and shiny. "Gumdrop's thermometer!" cried Bill. "Yeah, they must have found it in the ditch where it had been hidden since winter," said Farmer Hearn. So Gumdrop got his thermometer back. And the chickens had an extra feed that night. Perhaps they weren't so stupid after all. Mr. Josiah Oldcastle lived in a small house in the country, and he liked it very much. He had a small garden, which he liked even more. There was also a small garage with large red doors, and inside the garage was something which Mr. Oldcastle liked best of all. It was a blue car with a black hood and a brass horn. It had 4 large wheels and 4 small lamps and a brass thermometer. It was an Austin Clifton Heavy 12-4, vintage 1926, and it was called Gumdrop. One fine morning, a letter arrived. "Oh, it's from BBC Television in London," cried Mr. Oldcastle, "and they want Gumdrop to appear on a programme tomorrow afternoon at 3 o'clock. Mr. Oldcastle was delighted. "Well, millions of people will see Gumdrop," he thought, "so I'd better polish him up until he shines." And he did just that. The sun was shining when he set out next morning, so Mr. Oldcastle put Gumdrop's hood down. At 11:45, they crossed Tower Bridge and drove past the Tower of London. Suddenly, a yeoman of the guard came hurrying towards them. My name is Biffin, sir. I'd be very much obliged for a lift to Westminster. I can't go by bus because they won't let this partisan of mine on board. Jump in, then, said Mr. Oldcastle, and the grateful beefeater, holding the awkward weapon above his head, did just that. It was 12:15 when they reached St. Paul's Cathedral. Just then, two men ran out of a building, jumped into a small yellow car, turned sharply into the road so that Gumdrop had to stop, and drove smartly away. "Stop those men!" shouted a policeman, who ran out of the building too and jumped into Gumdrop. "I am Sergeant Bluemantle, and I was called to apprehend those persons who have just stolen £5,000 from the bank. We must catch them, so please be good enough to drive as fast as you can after them." There was heavy traffic in Fleet Street, and the going was slow. The yellow car was way ahead of them. It was nearly 1:45 by the time they reached the law courts, where they had to stop again. A man in a wig was sitting in the middle of a zebra crossing, and he was very angry.
Yes, those uncouth villains in that impossible yellow contraption have just knocked me down. If I don't see them prosecuted for this, then my name is not Sir Pomeroy Pendlebury Clutterbuck, Justice of Her Majesty's High Court.
"Please get in, then," said Mr. Oldcastle, and the judge did just that. It was 1:15 when the bandits reached Whitehall. There they suddenly turned right, drove through a gateway, and disappeared.
"Follow them through the Horse Guards,"
ordered Sir Pomeroy.
"And you, my men,"
calling the two mounted sentries,
"follow us."
Corporal Withers and Trooper Gaskin did just that. It was 1:30 when they reached Buckingham Palace. The bandits drove their car recklessly through the band of the Grenadier Guards, skidded round the Victoria Memorial, and roared up Constitution Hill. Gumdrop was stopped by Drummer Thumpet. "I'll make mincemeat of them for this," he cried, and jumped in. "After them!" And Gumdrop did just that. But the bandits were too fast for them. Gumdrop pursued them back to Piccadilly Circus and Trafalgar Square.
"I shall be late for the programme on television if this goes on much longer,"
complained Mr. Oldcastle, driving as fast as he could through the traffic jams. "Yes, but we must arrest those fellows first," said Sergeant Bluemantle.
"And have them up in court,"
added Sir Pomeroy.
"So hurry up, man."
And Mr. Oldcastle did just that. In Parliament Square, Big Ben struck 2, and the bells of Westminster Abbey joined in. It was getting very late. By now, the yellow car was out of sight. Gumdrop couldn't go very fast because the weight of Mr. Oldcastle, Beefeater Biffin, Sergeant Bluemantle, Sir Pomeroy Pendlebury Clutterbuck, and Drummer Thumpet had slowed him down considerably. It was just as well that Corporal Withers and Trooper Gaskin had their horses to ride on.
They went up that street there,"
said Lance Corporal Albert Gunner, a Chelsea pensioner, when they stopped to ask him.
"Get in, then,"
said Mr. Oldcastle,
"and show us the way."
and Lance Corporal Gunner did just that. It was nearly 2:30 when they reached the Albert Hall, and it was getting extremely late, but they had to stop again to allow members of the Philharmonic Orchestra to cross over from the Albert Memorial.
"If you are chasing that yellow menace that nearly had us over just now, then I will come and show you which way they went,"
cried Mr. Owen Llewellyn, the trombone player.
"Indeed, to goodness I will."
And he did just that.
"I shall never get to Television Centre at this rate,"
protested Mr. Oldcastle. He drove on as fast as he could until they came to Shepherd's Bush. "There they go!" cried all the passengers in Gumdrop. "We'll catch them yet." But the yellow car was too fast for them again. It roared up a straight road. It was almost out of sight when suddenly the bandits saw a police car in the road. They turned their car sharply and drove through an open gate. Gumdrop went after them, and the police car followed behind.
"Look there!" cried Mr. Oldcastle in delight. "They've brought us to where I've been trying to drive all day."
And it was the BBC Television Centre, and it was 5 minutes to 3. There was no way out for the bandits. They stopped their car, jumped out, and ran up the stairs and through the doors. Gumdrop stopped too. The passengers jumped out of Gumdrop. The policeman jumped out of the police car, and they all ran up the stairs and through the doors after the bandits.
"They might get out through the back and escape," said Sergeant Bluemantle to Mr. Oldcastle.
"Let's try to head them off then," said Mr. Oldcastle. He turned Gumdrop round and did just that.
He drove Gumdrop through a wide doorway into a curved corridor which ran round the whole building. They turned a corner, and there they had to stop. The bandits were running towards them, and all the others chasing the bandits were running too. Gumdrop was blocking their way, so the bandits opened the door and ran straight in. It was the television studio, and the time was 3 o'clock. In the studio, the program had just started. Everybody else came tumbling in after the bandits. The television cameras were working as the bandits were surrounded. They were held fast by the policeman from the police car as Sergeant Bluemantle handcuffed the robbers. So ended Gumdrop's journey to London. It had turned into a wild chase through London after 2 desperate bank robbers, and Mr. Oldcastle had nearly missed his program on television. But he didn't after all. Instead, he helped to arrest the criminals in front of the television cameras, and 3 million people who watched the program saw him do it. "This is all thanks to Gumdrop," said the presenter of the program to his huge audience, as Gumdrop was pushed into the studio. The cameras were still working away. So join us now in a song to celebrate Gumdrop, an astonishing and exceptional Austin Clifton Heavy 12/4 Vintage 1926.
The Brighton Run is organised each year to commemorate the emancipation of the motor car in 1896, when the first London to Brighton Run was held. It is a strict and immutable rule now that only those cars which were built before the end of 1904 can take part. This date remains constant.
On a sunny Sunday morning in early November, only a few cars could be seen at Hyde Park Corner in London. But one was the most extraordinary car indeed. It had a blue body, black wings, brass radiator, and a curly horn. It was an Austin Clifton Heavy 12/4 Vintage 1926, and it was called Gumdrop. This was the day of the famous annual Brighton Run for Veteran Cars, and Mr. Josiah Oldcastle was driving Gumdrop to join them on his first run.
"Oh, it'll be grand to drive to Brighton," he said to his dog Horace, "and lots of people will admire Gumdrop. What's more, we might even appear on television."
Horace gave a happy bark. The veteran cars were already lined up in the park when Gumdrop arrived. Lots of people admired them, but strange to say, hardly anyone looked at Gumdrop. Mr. Oldcastle couldn't understand this until the secretary of the club came up and spoke sternly.
"Sir, your car is not old enough to join the Brighton Run. It is a strict rule," he went on, "that no car which was made after 1904 can take part. Gumdrop here was made in 1926, so he is only a vintage car. He is not a proper veteran." "Not old enough?"
Mr. Oldcastle was vastly disappointed as he watched the veterans drive off.
"Well, no Brighton for us," he told Horace. "No admiration and certainly no TV."
Just then, a yellow omnibus appeared, full of Chelsea pensioners.
"Oi! Oi! Wait for us!"
shouted the driver, but Mr. Oldcastle stopped him.
"Oh, no, you can't join the Brighton Run because you aren't old enough either."
And then he had an idea.
"I'll tell you what. We shall have our own Brighton Run, and as we are not proper veterans, we shall not go by the Brighton Road, but on side roads instead."
The pensioners cheered. Horace barked, Mr. Oldcastle started Gumdrop's engine, and they were off. So they drove out of London and were about to turn off the Brighton Road when a man stopped them. His yellow veteran car had broken down, and he had to get to Brighton in time. Of course, Mr. Oldcastle offered him a lift. Mr. Thornycroft got into Gumdrop, and they were off. Soon they were in the country. Suddenly, at a crossroads, they had to stop, because there came a wheel, all by itself, and behind it came a veteran car on 3 wheels only, out of control, and from the opposite direction came a truck, fast. There will be a dreadful accident. In a flash, Mr. Oldcastle knew what he had to do. He drove Gumdrop forward and stopped. The veteran car bumped into Gumdrop's big wheel and stopped too. The truck saw Gumdrop, braked, swerved, and slid into a ditch. Whew! A dreadful accident was avoided. Boofy Greenhorn of the truck was grateful as Gumdrop pulled it out of the ditch. "That's a bit of luck," he said. "We were hurrying to film the Brighton run for TV tonight and thought we'd miss them." "But we are not the proper veteran," began Mr. Oldcastle. But Boofy interrupted. "You're old crocs, aren't you? We were supposed to film the old bangers, and film you we shall." And he ran back to his truck. "My word," thought Mr. Oldcastle. "Gumdrop is going to Brighton after all, and it looks as though he'll be filmed for TV too." After some miles, they saw a strange bicycle. "That's old Dusty Miller on his penny farthing," exclaimed one of the pensioners. "Come and join our Brighton run." After a few more miles, Horace jumped out of Gumdrop and dashed round a corner. There was another cocker spaniel called Max sitting there in a steamroller. "You must come with us to Brighton," said Mr. Oldcastle to its driver, "so that Horace can talk to your dog." After another mile, they saw a Model A. "Hey there, Lofty," called Boofy to his friend. "Your scrap heap's worthy of this odd lot of bangers here. Come with us to Brighton, come on." So there was quite a cavalcade following Gumdrop now. The omnibus, the veteran, the TV truck, a steamroller, the Model A, and a penny farthing. And Boofy filmed them all. He still thought he was filming the real Brighton run. At a crossroads, they stopped to let a lorry go past. "Jumping Jehoshaphat!" exclaimed Mr. Thornycroft. "That's my car on that lorry there. Good Lord, it's been stolen. We must catch the blighters." So Gumdrop gave chase, and they soon overtook the lorry. But they couldn't stop it. Just then, Mr. Oldcastle saw a crane at the side of the road. "There's a stolen car back on that lorry there," he shouted. "Get down to it." The crane driver knew what to do. He lowered his big hook, and just as the thieves passed under it, the hook caught the Thornycroft car and lifted it straight out of the lorry. The thieves were frightened. Their lorry overtook Gumdrop, and they soon disappeared round the corner. "1,000 thanks," said Mr. Thornycroft to the crane driver. "Would you be so kind as to follow us to Brighton and bring my car?" So the crane turned and followed the procession. And all the time, Boofy filmed the scene and cried, "Fantastic! Just fantastic!" They were approaching Brighton now, downhill and going fast. Suddenly, there was a cry behind Gumdrop. "Go faster! My brakes are bust!" Mr. Oldcastle didn't fancy a 22-horsepower omnibus running into Gumdrop, so he went faster still. And then he saw the Brighton road ahead and all the veteran cars coming along it. There was only one thing to do. He slowed down. The omnibus bumped gently into Gumdrop's back. Gumdrop was pushed forward again, but Mr. Oldcastle jammed on the brakes, and he pulled on the handbrake hard. And then they stopped, just in the nick of time. Phew! Oh, another dreadful accident was avoided. It was a great moment when they arrived in Brighton, with all the people cheering Gumdrop and his strange procession as they came in, ahead of the proper veterans of the real Brighton run. So they did come to Brighton, and they were cheered by all, and they would appear on television after all. When they finally stopped, the secretary of the club came up. "Thank you for bringing our president to Brighton in time," he said. "And I thank you," said the president, who was none other than Mr. Thornycroft, "for saving the day. To acknowledge our gratitude to you and your splendid vehicle, I hereby elect Gumdrop as an honorary veteran car extraordinary, so that you can join the Brighton run every year from now on." And the 20 million people who watched Boofy's film that night on television didn't seem to notice that they watched the wrong Brighton run. They thought what an exciting Brighton run this Gumdrop run had been. They watched how Gumdrop saved the three-wheeled veteran, how Gumdrop pulled out the TV truck, how they chased the thieves, how the crane saved the stolen car, how Gumdrop stopped the omnibus, and how all the people cheered Gumdrop at the end of it all.